Well, good morning. Welcome back to those who came last night, and welcome to Edmond Trinity for those who are attending this morning for the first time. I'm Don Heath. My wife Mary and I are co-pastors, and I'll just give you a little layout for how the morning will go. We'll have a talk by Dr. Lisa Barnett right now on the topic on the board there, and we'll go until 10:20, let's say, or 10:40, and then take about a 20-minute break, and we'll then have a panel discussion at 11 with members of with Cherie Dickerson of Black Lives Matter, Adam Brooks of the Jewish Federation of Oklahoma City, and Veronica Lejeune of CARE Oklahoma. That's the Council of American Islamic Relations. And before we get started, we wanted to bring your attention. We have a Juneteenth display, if you haven't noticed, that's on the west walls of the loggia back there. And Philip Tolbert had that displayed in the Edmond Public Library last month, and so I would encourage you to go through that as well. Okay. Our speaker this morning is Dr. Lisa Barnett. And as we mentioned last night, white Christian nationalism has a 400-year history in this country. It takes various forms. I mean, sometimes it's submerged and you don't see it, and other times it's out in the open, like now. We don't have dog whistles anymore. We have bullhorns when it comes to this type of stuff. And Sam Perry in his book talks about the spirit of 1690 when he talks about that we could have gone a different path, and he talks about the alternatives. One of them being Roger Williams in Pennsylvania could have been the path we took, but and several different points in American history we had an option to try for a multiracial democracy, and we always rejected that alternative. Lisa is going to focus on one period, the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, and how they used the flag and the cross to fuse nationalism and religion and politics. So I'll turn it over right now to Dr. Lisa Barnett. Please welcome her.
Thank you. I think we decided I'm just going to stay here and use this mic. That might be best. And I apologize. I hope all of the slides kind of come across a little bit. A lot of them are from some newspaper articles, and sometimes the quality is not always the best. But I promise I will try to read some of the information and things on the slide. And for those of you former students I see out there that have had me in class, you know I get excited and I talk a little fast sometimes, so try to hang on and keep up with me, okay? One of the things when I went to seminary at Bright Divinity School, the first thing, and now that I teach at Phillips Theological Seminary, is we take students and we try to go through this process of what is your embedded theology? What have you learned about God, about Jesus, from other people that has been passed on as part of your heritage, your traditions, and what happens when you're confronted with other alternatives, right? And for a lot of folks that come to seminary, that shakes the core of their faith. But part of our process, at least in our seminary, is to get you to start thinking outside for yourself and questioning some of that embedded theology. As a historian, I have since discovered we also carry embedded histories. We've been taught history one particular way, and when we're confronted with alternatives, a lot of people just want to no, right? And that's what we're seeing currently today. This idea of revisionist history. No, it's just expanding the historical narrative, but it's not the history that a lot of people want to hear. And so the clamp down there. I became interested in the KKK, when I was working on a degree at Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, Texas, which is on the campus of Texas Christian University. And I was commissioned to write some chapters on the history of Bright Divinity School. And one of the newspaper articles after Bright got established, or after TCU got moved to Fort Worth, Texas, a Dallas couple donated $80,000 back in 1915, 1916, I can't remember there, to build a church across the street, Flagship Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I'm like, why would a Dallas couple give $80,000? Where did they get $80,000 at that time period? So I wanted to learn more about Reverend A.C. Parker that's mentioned in this newspaper article. And when I Google him, I find he is a disciples pastor, an insurance company director, and an oilman who lived in Dallas. And he's also a Cyclops in the Klan. And founded 2 disciple churches in Dallas, and then gave $80,000 to found University Christian Church at TCU. And I'm like, whoa, that's where the Fort Worth mayor and, prominent people attend that church. And so that sort of started my interest. And then I did a series in Fort Worth on the Klan and other religions and involvement. And so I present now a warning that historical material and images may be disturbing to some of our contemporary sensibilities. Just to give you a little background, remember there's a first Klan that comes in the Reconstruction period following the Civil War. It is classified really as a terrorist organization, but the real aim at that particular time, it's a very loosely organized group of political and social terrorists. And their plan is to defeat the Republican Party and to maintain absolute white supremacy in response to the newly gained civil and political rights by Southern Blacks after the Civil War. And they're successful in anchoring some of their political goals, not necessarily a lot of the social goals. Congress steps in to intervene and succeeds in breaking the back of the Klan before that election of 1872, but the Klan does not go away. And again, their targets, besides freed Blacks, are the scallywags and the carpetbaggers, coming from the North down to the South and trying to change the system. But even as 1868, look at what is running in our politics. This is the ticket for Seymour and Blair for the presidential campaign. And notice the motto. This is a white man's country. Let white men rule. Those are the political parties. So the Klan picks up on this. It's founded in 1866, really kind of as a social organization. But again, it starts the violence. Notice too, on some of these depictions of the early garb and weapons, you don't see the crosses right now. You do, in some of the newspaper stories, see some of what looks like a cross, but the reference is on daggers. They're emphasizing the violence. And then you start to see a cross in some areas start to emerge on some of their costumes, their garb. But what is interesting, when we get to the second iteration of the Klan in the 1920s, the cross becomes very prominent. All right. So let's talk about context for what's going to come. Remember, World War I is happening. Patriotism, right? Country, particularly after the United States gets involved in the war. But the anti-German sentiment, the anti-foreign sentiment is running rampant thanks to World War I. Immigration, hot topic. Between 1900 and 1915, more than 15 million immigrants arrive in the U.S., equal to the previous 40 years combined. And they are challenging the cities where they're staying. The cities become more and more crowded. City services fail to keep up. But more importantly, these immigrants that are coming at this time period, Gilded Age to into the early progressive, they're called new immigrants. They're coming from Southern or Eastern Europe, including Italy, Poland, Russia, and the Balkans, China and Japan as well until that's outlawed. But the new immigrants are primarily Catholic, Orthodox, and Jewish. Most are kind of unskilled. And there's a separation now between new immigrants and old immigrants. And a lot of the new immigrants get associated with anarchism, Bolshevism, socialism, all of those isms, right, that people want to start fearing. And they're not willing to give up some of their cultural customs when they come to the United States. And thus this idea of the melting pot, they're not willing to participate and assimilate into that, quote, American identity, whatever that is, determined by whomever, right? And so now we fear the other. And when we fear, that leads to problems. You also have at this time period, and I think this is an important context, there's a change in the religious landscape. Higher criticism is developing. It's coming from Germany after the Civil War. It's taking on, particularly in the Presbyterian Church, this is Briggs with the heresy trial, right? You're questioning the Bible. You're questioning the historicity and the authorship and those sort of things. And a reaction to that is the emergence of fundamentalism. And Lyman Stewart and his brother, oil magnates, commission essays that promote this theology of fundamentals. Oh, we believe in the miracles. We believe in the virgin birth. We believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. Over and against the higher criticism, the theological liberalism that's developing. So that's the religious landscape that is also taking place that fuels part of this. And notice we're focusing on education. The path to education, socialism, science, Darwinism, evolution. How does that fit with these fundamental theological beliefs of the Bible is the inerrant word of God? And so we have this tension that's developing. Enter William Joseph Simmons, a failed Methodist minister. He had been assigned in the Methodist small churches in Alabama and Georgia, and really was kind of disheartened that never got promoted to the big church. And so he wants to organize a fraternal organization. He starts with, I believe, the Woodmen of America and tries to organize some, service organizations. And then with everything going on, he becomes infatuated with resurging once again the Ku Klux Klan. And so he envisions bringing it back now as a big fraternal organization, kind of romanticizing that Southern culture and the white supremacy. But he wants to make it, in his words, a social, patriotic, fraternal, and beneficiary order. And so it is chartered in 1915, Stone Mountain, Georgia. It is formed, and the fiery cross is burned. For the first time, the Klan incorporates the fiery cross. That was not part of the first Klan. It was an invention added by William Simmons, the founder of the second Klan in 1915. And where do we get this idea of the cross? Well, we can go back to 1905, the publication of Thomas Dixon's The Klansman, an historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan, and some of the illustrations from the book that romanticized the Klan saving the South. And then, of course, it is turned into a movie in 1915. D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, a cinematic, spectacular culture, right? And this influences Simmons. And so the Klan emerges. Now, the interesting thing about this Klan, too, is it's coming out with Simmons. Simmons enlists the aid of a marketing team, a woman and a man in 1920. he hired the Southern Publicity Association, which was a public relations and fundraising firm owned by Elizabeth Tyler and Edward Young Clark, to help overcome some of his weakness in organizing and trying to grow the membership ranks and the revenues. And actually, it's this team that does swell the ranks of the Klan, but it also becomes the point of dissension within the Klan organization, where Simmons is going to be challenged by a Dallas dentist in 1922, Hiram Evans, for leadership of the Klan. Because it's alleged at that time, Simmons isn't really running the Klan. It's Mrs. Elizabeth Tyler that is. And you can't have a woman running the Klan, right? But they swell the ranks. This time around, and I know this is hard to see, but this story really talks about how it is based on the original Klan, the old Klan of the South, like the original. The slogan was white supremacy directed against Black people. But now that's become kind of a side issue, says the story. Today, it is primarily anti-Jew, anti-Catholic, anti-alien, and it is spreading more than twice as fast through the North and the South as is growing in the South. Indiana becomes a hotbed of the Klan. It extends all the way to Oregon, where later on with the women, you have the Ladies of the Invisible Empire forming in Portland, of all places, right? And a lot of other women organizations that start to form throughout there. So we have new targets. Notice on their membership card, your friends say, this is a reference card, your friends say you're a native-born white Gentile American citizen, 100% American. This phrase, 100% American, really gets ramped up in the 1920s as criteria. You believe in America first and white supremacy at all times. That's on the card. And this is the reference of how it gets going. So then there becomes a membership system. Talk about marketing. For $10, you can join the Klan. That's your admission into your initiation fee, the Klectatron. And there's the Simmons at the top, Tyler and Clark. And then you have the Grand Goblin, which is like a regional manager, right? Different states divided up. And then you have Kliegels within the states and the local organizations recruiting local members. Here's how it works. For $10, the Kliegel recruits a new member and gets to keep $4 as commission. The King Kliegel of the state gets $1. The Grand Goblin, the regional, person, gets 50 cents. $2.50 gets to Tyler and Clark, and then $2 goes to Simmons. There's incentive for enlisting your friends and neighbors in the Klan. Right? There's money to be made. And notice the Kliegel's pledge of loyalty here. Again, it's really hard to see. But the Kliegel says, I do freely and voluntarily promise, pledge, and fully guarantee a lofty respect, wholehearted loyalty, and unwavering devotion at all times and under any and all circumstances and conditions from this day and date forward to William Joseph Simmons, an imperial wizard and emperor of the invisible empire. So your pledge of loyalty is to this one individual. Wow. Does that sound vaguely familiar of what's happening in contemporary society? It is right out of the playbook. And from that $2 off of every membership that Simmons makes, here in Atlanta is the Imperial Palace that he builds to operate the KKK. The symbols that get used by the KKK. Well, let me back real quickly. I know in Oklahoma, KKK recruiters target potential members through their membership already in fraternal organizations. They target members of the Masons. They target members of Protestant churches. And at this particular time, they're targeting members of the wartime councils of defense that are in the cities, obviously with World War I going on and looming. So like in Oklahoma City, the Klansmen met at the Congregational Church in the old Epworth University building, as well as the Huckins Hotel and chambers of Judge George Clark, who was an early initiate. And there are other prominent citizens in Oklahoma City that came from the Oklahoma City Council of Defense to start the Klan in this area. And it spreads to Tulsa, but mainly it spreads to a lot of small towns. And again, Masons, church members, that becomes prominent. So symbols of the Klan. This is from some of my research. And the cross, the Bible, the flag. I really want to highlight the cross and the flag because this old flag, purchased by the blood and suffering of American heroes, represents the price paid for American liberties. It is the symbol of the Constitution of the U.S. It supports free schools, freedom of worship, peaceable assembly, free speech, all of those buzzwords in the Constitution. Yeah, freedom, right? Freedom. And again, this is how we build not only embedded theologies, but embedded histories. When you start to hear these connections over and over as it becomes normative in the vernacular of our everyday living, and then you read and you see the religious and the patriotic ideals of the Ku Klux Klan put together, combining the cross and the flag to support an empire of William Simmons and an ideology of white supremacy. Oh my goodness, this part of that brochure, Jesus was a real patriot. He sent Peter to catch a fish with a coin in its mouth, and he might pay the prescribed temple tax. He taught obedience, render unto Caesar. He was obedient to law and always represented the powers that be. What Jesus are these people reading about, right? But this is what they're writing about. Jesus was a patriot, and the more like Christ we can be, the better Klansmen we are. That's what it means to be a Christian. And this is brochures they're passing out and freely giving and draping their propaganda in the flag, targeting Catholics, targeting Jews, targeting public schools. And notice then now, not only the fiery cross at their initiation services, but the American flag right next to it. And that's where they're telling people to pledge their loyalty. Over in Muskogee, there is a Klan newspaper that starts being printed called the Oklahoma Herald. And notice their little banner there. We follow wherever Old Glory leads. Our flag comes first. Yes, it does. The starry flag and the cross will never fail, says the Klan. Oh, I love this picture. Simmons, the imperial wizard, kissing the flag. Do I remember someone else grabbing a flag and kissing it and embracing? I know that when I see these images, I'm like, oh. So how do we get people to join? Well, we spin it. It's all about America. The Klan has a responsibility, the Constitution to protect the rights and duties of American citizens. You know, exactly what Sam was talking about last night, this ideology merging with nationalism, that your loyalty becomes to an ideology and an institution. And so, hey, the only way we can support the Constitution, the Klan is going to protect our rights as American citizens. It stands for the preservation of our American institution. The Klan stands for law and order. It stands for free public schools, free press, and free speech. So again, we're targeting those institutions that they want to remake in their own image, but this is how they're drawing people in. 100% Americans here at Thanksgiving have a reason to be thankful. because the Klan is thankful for the country that has emerged with honor in this worldwide conflict. And towards the end, the Klansman is thankful that his race is supreme in its control of the affairs of the world. This is from Lincoln, Nebraska. Lovers of law and order, peace, justice, and morality. Well, who doesn't support? Progressive Christians support those things, right? It's just a difference then in how we're interpreting those particular words and how we're achieving those ends. So what does the Klan stand for? Well, it stands for the tenets of Christian religion, white supremacy, protection of our pure womanhood, right? We're going to protect our women because, you know, men have to protect women. Just laws and liberty, a closer relationship of pure Americanism, upholding of the Constitution, sovereignty of states' rights, separation of church and state, but not really, freedom of speech and press, right? All of these things, limitation of foreign immigration and local reforms, law and order, all of those things. This is what the Klan stands for. It is a patriotic duty for men to join the Klan, to have the best interest of your community, city, state, and nation at heart. This is how they enlist people. They appeal to people's patriotism, but then they draw them in to a nationalist agenda and ideology. The Klan recognizes, again, a lot of their paraphernalia. I'm going to kind of skip ahead. This one I love. What it stands for: America first. First in thought, first in affections, first in the galaxy of nations, the stars and stripes forever. It stands for benevolence. Okay. It stands for clannishness, real fraternity. They even publish their own magazine, The Courier, the official organ of the Ku Klux Klan, and it is the magazine of Americanism. So again, this is how people get drawn in. Notice too, when you decide to join, you are making an application for citizenship into the invisible empire. Undersigned, a native-born, true and loyal citizen of the United States, being a white male Gentile person of temperate habits, sound in mind, and a believer in the tenets of the Christian religion, the maintenance of white supremacy, and the principles of pure Americanism, do most respectfully apply for membership into the KKK. So this idea that you are a citizen of the world and a citizen of Christ and a citizen of the United States, and now it all gets incorporated into the Klan. And of course, again, the flag, the cross, anti-Catholic sentiments. Their initiation services are called public naturalization services. This one's taking place, I believe, Cushing in the Drumright area in Oklahoma. Here's the letterhead of Oklahoma City, KKK. Now let's talk a little bit. We've talked about the flag. Now let's talk a little bit about religion. Oh my goodness. The bright, fiery cross, songs written about it and published. So again, the initiation services combine the fiery cross and the flag. Oh, the Klan as a benevolent organization raises money, randomly would show up in churches to present a financial donation to the minister. And again, this is how they're enlisting people to join. They're pretending they're the Rotary and the Kiwanis Club and, you know, those kind of organizations, and doing good charitable works. And so they show up in churches to present checks to ministers. And of course, the newspaper reports that the KKK goes to church. And ministers start getting sucked in. This is from New Jersey, introducing the Cyclops to the congregation. A lot of ministers start joining the Klan. and preaching from the pulpit and organizing big patriotic services. Reverend Sanders from the Christian Church, and I can't remember exactly what town in Oklahoma he's a part of. I'd have to go back through my notes and look there. Look at this one, the call to service, revival services at the Christian Church. The world, what's wrong with the world and what's the remedy? I guarantee you the preacher's talking about the KKK as the remedy. And then a lot of preachers, again, get involved and start preaching in favor of the Klan. I came across this publication while I was researching, and it's really disturbing. It's a book that was published by a woman, Bishop Alma White, the Ku Klux Klan in Prophecy. And she is writing how the KKK is the fulfillment of prophecy in the Bible. And the illustrations are what are so disturbing. Again, notice now we're talking religion and the flag being brought together. The great army for truth and Americanism makes Rome tremble. That idea of 100% Americanism there, this is an illustration from the book. The white-robed army, the protectors of Americanism. We're holding up the Bible now, and the cross, and the flag. The open initiation under the light of the fiery cross. And I love this. Washington and Lincoln are giving their blessings. Now we're into politics, right? Now it's being sanctioned by the founders and those that we admire. Oh, wow, these next ones. The men who are refusing to bow to the great image, of course, who are not Christian, but the flag is very prominent there. What's going to bring the walls down? The ballot. Voting. The KKK in the 1920s organized political blocs to take over political parties to support candidates in primarily local elections, but also state elections. In Oklahoma, if you know your history, that's where Jack Walton gets impeached because he wants to challenge the Klan. There's controversy over Johnston as governor and his involvement in the Klan and his executive secretary, Mrs. Hammonds, and her involvement in the women's KKK. So the Klan is active in Oklahoma politics. It's active in politics in every state, but that is a purposeful strategy to put candidates in, particularly sheriffs, and those county level, local level law enforcement officers so that they can turn a blind eye to some of the Klan's activity. It's a very purposeful strategy. And guess what? We're going to defend public schools. We want to keep the Bible in schools. Well, now we want to put the 10 Commandments in every classroom. It is a purposeful strategy to educate by indoctrination in public and to use public education for that. And so the Klan proclaims itself to be the defenders of public education in the 1920s. Here's where we take that theology and just woo. Here's the illustration of the Good Samaritan, which is actually the KKK caring for the man who was wounded while his persecutors flee. So, yeah. And this next one. Then Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fishes and blessed them and gave it to his disciples. And in like manner is the truth being carried to the people by the KKK. Now we're really few. And these are from that 1925 book, the KKK. And I believe you can probably find that book free online now via, digitized Hattie Trust, I think. Hattie Trust is where I found some of the images. This image was given to me, and the date is wrong. It should be 1933. This is the 1933 building dedication for Lincoln Terrace Christian Church in Oklahoma City, down by the Capitol. And again, the date is 1933. Location-wise, down by the Capitol, there's kind of separates different parts of town. When this church opened in 1933, there is a clear message about who is not welcome to sit in the balcony. And this is a Christian church, Disciples of Christ, right? The Klan has infiltrated churches in Oklahoma, and it's not just Christian churches, it's Methodist churches, it's Baptist churches, it's Episcopal churches. It is insidious. And so how does that play out? Well, the 1920s, now we involve women. Simmons had an idea to promote an auxiliary group for women. That was one of another tension with Hiram Evans as well about the women's auxiliary. Simmons, as Evans takes control over the Klan, Simmons tries to keep it going and has loyal followers and uses women. And notice too, women now can vote. So why wouldn't we want to recruit women, right? And have another Klan vote at the ballot box. And the article that I just wrote for a chapter that I hope is going to be published with OU Press, the idea, there are women organizations already working outside of the Klan in Texas. There's some. I mentioned the Ladies of the Invisible Empire in Portland, Oregon. But there was one before all of those that gets incorporated in Oklahoma from a group in Claremore called the WAP Study Club, White American Protestant Study Club. And it becomes later on, when Simmons announces a woman's auxiliary, he specifically names that organization as the model for what will become the women's KKK. And that came out of Claremore, Oklahoma. And it gets incorporated in the state of Oklahoma. It goes through a variation. It's the WAP Study Club, and then it becomes the Camellias, and then it becomes the WKKK. So we're getting women involved, and really out of the second KKK, we also have kids involved. We're going to start them young. This is from even 48, even after the Klan supposedly is dissipated. No, it never went away. But children, the kiddie KKK, you had toddlers, you had, and here's the women as well. Notice in the 1950s, the message, now we have some new enemies, integration and communism. So instead of Bolshevism and anarchism and socialism, communism, of course, in the Cold War becomes a big target, as well as integration in North Carolina. Rallies, even in 1966, civil rights movement. And the Klan to what? Save America. Notice the white public only, so it's promoting that white supremacy. We don't learn from our history. This is 1925. Notice by 1925 too, the masks are off. We don't need to disguise ourselves anymore. Here and proud. And they're marching down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol building to the Treasury Department on August 8th, 1925. And I know the women were part of that march. And then January 6th. The same kind of crowds, the flag, the Bible, Jesus. This picture is most disturbing. We have co-opted Christianity and Jesus Christ for our white supremacist ideology. I grew up in Blackwell, Oklahoma. My mom still lives in Blackwell, Oklahoma. When I went to visit her, 4 houses down from where my mom lives in Blackwell, her neighbors have put up a flagpole in their front yard. And they are proudly flying the American flag and the Christian flag. When I went back a few months later, they added a 3rd flag. Come and take it with the cannon, all right? Come and take it. Those constitutional rights. This is the embedded theology, the embedded history that has been passed down to us. And I swear some of those politicians have taken a page right out of the playbook from William Simmons in the 1920s in how they use certain words to attract certain people, to play on certain cultural values, even though they may have different meanings to different people. But this is how insidious it is that it gets passed on, and it just becomes normative, particularly that. You see that all the time in churches. How many preachers preach with an American flag right behind him, reinforcing those semiotic messages that this is acceptable? And then when you add the Christian flag, of course, in there, both of them brought in kind of at the height of some during the Civil War, because, you know, both sides were not the Christian flag. It wasn't there at the time, but both sides in the Civil War were claiming their side, bringing their flag into the service. But it was really World War I where you started to see the American flag coming in, right? Patriotism, supporting the country in an effort to fight the war. And by now, though, we have a Christian flag that's been invented and added to that. And the two go hand in hand. If you have the Christian flag, you have to have the American flag, and you have to display them prominently in the sanctuary. And this is where, you know, these are the battle cries for a lot of new pastors coming out of seminary. Pastors have left jobs because congregations don't want to remove those flags. It has become so idolatrous to think about it, right? That we worship those flags as decor in the sanctuaries in a lot of churches. But again, by having them there, we are reinforcing a message that the flag and the cross create an American identity. And that's what we need to start pushing up against, and that's what we need to start questioning. There's lots of different versions of what an American identity is, and this white supremacist identity is not the one. So I know I've finished a little early. I kind of got through because I wanted some time to have questions, thoughts, conversations. Yeah, these images are disturbing, but this, again, when you see them over and over, that becomes part of the history, that becomes part of your thinking and your way of life and the values that you support. So thank you all.
Well, Lisa, you put so many buttons, I don't know which ones to respond to. I will say we had two dear members of this congregation that died about 10 years ago that were members of Lincoln Terrace Christian Church, and they revered it. And they went up to Wynnewood Christian Church, and then dedicated the church to the African Americans there. And
I will say, in further investigation, in the 1960s, there was a group in Lincoln Terrace Christian Church that was supportive of the civil rights movement. And there was one ordained minister, I think he was a chaplain or something there, that with some African Americans in Oklahoma City, went to different churches and tried to join and white churches, and they were rejected. And Lincoln Park, the leadership rejected, but he kept pushing the church to try to change. So, you know, there's a complicated history.
It was an all-white church, and they left. They sold the church because the neighborhood had changed. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go around and do questions.
I'll let you get folks.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I was wondering, you did speak and show some pictures about the Disciples of Christ Church. I was wondering if your research has led to any more as a disciple. I would like to know, more about my own history. Uh, would any of this make it into your disciples history class at Phillips?
Yes, and that's something I've been kind of targeting specifically with some of the research, disciple congregations that ministers, particularly that were active in the Klan. And again, disciples, like a lot of denominations, got involved for maybe a lot of different reasons. But I know they may not want to hear it. El Reno was a hotbed. Enid was a hotbed.
Where Phillips was.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, what kind of got me started on that, I was looking through Marshall's papers at Phillips, and I came across one of his correspondence, and he was like, "Oh, the guys at the Bible College for Halloween decided to dress as the Klan. Oh, the Klan's going to run prohibition, save for prohibition in Enid and run the lawless bootleggers out of Enid." And Marshall was totally supportive in some of his private correspondence there. And I'm like, jaw drop there. So, I mean, it's a complicated history, but it is a history that we need to, these men were not perfect. These women were not perfect. They professed to be Christians. They did good, probably social work in the community, but they also got pulled in to an organization that started fueling different thoughts about how to be a Christian in the world. So,
Question and a comment. The question is that headquarters still in Atlanta for the KKK? And the comment is, when you were talking about this women's study group, made me think of the group that is women that have started up. I can't think of the name of them, but it's fairly recently. And they're
Moms
spreading.
for Liberty.
That's the one. Announced the headquarters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the headquarters are probably still in the Atlanta area. I'm not as familiar with some of the more current Klan activities as a historian, but I probably should be. But yeah, there's a lot of women are taking, I think, a lot too from the 1920s playbook of how to get involved in politics and promote particular agendas, particularly around what? Education. Save the schools.
Oh, thanks. If the Klan was so pro-Christianity, pro-Jesus, what were wrong with the Catholics in their view?
It wasn't the right Jesus, because at that time, the Catholic, well, two things. Prohibition, the Catholics still wanted to use real wine, right, for communion. And secondly, at that time, the Catholic Church was very much supportive of labor and unions and labor rights and stuff. And again, the Wobblies and those groups were associated with all of that anarchism, socialism, and all of those isms we don't like. So it was the wrong Jesus that they were supporting.
I'm a retired Oklahoma City University history professor
Huh.
and a colleague and friend of Blue Clark, who's
Yes,
you're doing.
his collection I looked at.
Right. I'm the person who asked about the headquarters in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta in the 50s, all segregated, of course. And there's now a Catholic church on the site of the 20s and 30s headquarters.
Okay, thank you
That
for
I
that.
passed by when I would go to
Wow.
high school,
There
which
is-
was half Jewish and a quarter Greek Orthodox.
Karma.
One thing that's related to what you said, Wednesday night, 3 days ago, I was in a church evening service in the church in Guthrie. And there was an American flag on the right,
Mhm.
but a State of Israel flag on the left,
Whoa.
because from their theology, and that was what the sermon was about,
Mhm.
but it was familiar to the congregation,
Mhm.
because their view is that the State of Israel is relevant to the end times.
Yes. And that's exactly what Sam talked about last night, exploring more that eschatology, the end times, that idea that Christian work with Israel will bring about certain conditions. And when those conditions are met, Jesus will come and take certain people to heaven. And some of us probably won't make the cut, you know?
And we will ask Adam Brooks on our panel coming forward about Christian
Oh,
Zionism.
good.
I just want to interject. I live just north of Waterloo Road, and at Waterloo and Broadway, there's about, I don't know, 100 yards of fence post with alternating American and Christian flags. And it's a church. I can't remember the name of the church that has put that up there. Their banner up there before that was about children. Parents, don't let your children be woke.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't let your children be woke. Wow.
What do you think drives people towards white supremacy? I mean, is it hate or fear, or
Yep.
what do you think drives people towards the ideology?
I would tend to say more often than not, it's fear. And I think those who have always been in power recognize the human tendency to fear change, to fear the other, to fear. There's a great history book, American Freedom, American Slavery, by Morgan, that I read, that really kind of talks about within the United States how a group of wealthy white elite people got poor white men to enlist in supporting slavery, right? Even though they didn't own enslaved individuals, this idea of, well, but someday you might, right? And if you are like us and not like others, but this fear of being left out of the quote American dream is what enlisted a lot of people into that. Think about the fear of who's going to take jobs away from white Americans, right? It's the same rhetoric. It's this fear of enlisting against the other, that people in power tap into. And that goes back in the history of Christianity. I teach the history of Christianity. And if you look at the Crusades, right? The anti-Muslim, the anti-Jewish, the sentiments, the anti-other sentiments, right? It's that fear of the other. And there's a lot of sociologists too that talk about with human nature, we have a tendency, it's called enemy creation theory. We always have to have an enemy. And when we don't have an enemy in front of us, we have to create an enemy. And I think there's a lot to that.
As a professor, could you tell me what the definition of woke means? Because I have no. Well, I mean, I hear laughter,
Yeah.
but there has been legislation in Florida, and then the politicians here in Oklahoma are using whatever this word means, and I don't know what it means. And I'm just asking, as a professor of personal study, can you tell me what that word means? Not an assumption. What does it mean?
I don't know a definition. I think it means to each individual however they choose to define it. And certainly DeSantis and Ryan Walters and other politicians are defining it one way and implying certain things with this ideology of white Christian nationalism to again inspire people to just rally against the word. And people don't know what it means, but they're all about rallying against it. It's just like the Klan in the 1920s. Patriotism, morality, law and order. Join us. And it's just become, I think, a buzzword for woke means you don't agree with our conservative values for DeSantis and Walters. Woke for progressive theological liberals is like, yes, let's be like Jesus. So it means different things to different people. And I don't think there is an academic definition that's been out there. I'm waiting on Sam Perry and Gorski and other sociologists to study that and to put it out there.
I was just going to mention, as I've follow a lot of Black voices on Twitter. And as I understand it, and some of the stories that I've read about it, the origins actually come from St. Louis after the Michael Brown killing.
Oh, okay.
And so it does have its roots in the Black
In the
community.
Black community.
And so it was almost like the old idea of stay vigilant, but stay woke,
Yes.
be awake,
Yes.
be aware
Okay.
of the racism around you. And so, like so many other words, as you mentioned earlier, the word liberty in particular,
Mhm.
a lot of these white supremacists and other folks will take those words, conflate their meaning, and use them for as a means of agitprop against more liberal thinkers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Two questions. First, Tulsa Race Massacre.
Mhm.
I've read and seen a lot about it, but I hadn't seen hardly anything about KKK involvement in that or.
The official KKK chapter did not emerge in Tulsa until right after. And then they built their little building downtown, their Clavern and stuff after the race massacre. But evidence is starting to come out that a lot of individuals were members of the Klan. It was kind of an unofficial, not organized group that was in the Tulsa area. In fact, the lawyer that the court appointed attorney for the man that was accused of harassing the white woman and then just disappeared, that lawyer was a member of the KKK. And so no wonder that his client just disappeared. The lawyer said, well, we sent him to be safe, never heard from again. So definitely the Klan. And in fact, even before the Klan is organized, a lot of former Confederate soldiers that still have some of their uniforms and were members of the first Klan had a big public rally in Skiatook in like 1914. So they were organizing proudly even before the Klan came to Oklahoma.
Hello. Historically, you had some news stories all the way up to the 1960s.
Mhm.
So what was the trigger event or the thing in history that really stopped Klan? I know you're saying it's not really gone,
Mhm.
but was it the civil rights movement in the 1960s when we stopped seeing everybody in their white outfits, or was there some other impetus?
I mean, the Klan has never really gone away. I think there was a hiatus between the 1920s with the Great Depression and World War II. And so you don't see as much organized activity during the latter part of the 30s and the 40s. And then after World War II, of course, it picks up again with the start of the organized civil rights movement and the Cold War with communism. And those become the rallying cries to help recruit. It continues to go through even the 60s, 70s with all of the different civil rights movements going on. And even now, I mean, David Duke and others that keep perpetuating the Klan, it's never gone away.
I just had a point of clarification if you have the evidence. The lawyer from the case in Tulsa, are you aware of evidence of him being a member previous to the trial or only? You don't have it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. It was from a secondary source that I read, and I want to try to find some more primary sources for that. It may have been after the fact, but even then, the tendencies of some of those individuals to support some of that white supremacist agenda was certainly there, drawn to the Klan. Yeah. Yeah, but thanks. That's a great question. I need to dig some more into that.
Hi, so my concern is today's climate. So there's a lot of white supremacist extremism happening in Oklahoma with the Proud Boy presence in Tulsa, a white supremacist elected to city council in Enid. What can we do now to combat that and to limit their spread? Because it seems very, while they're not officially KKK, it seems extremely similar.
I think what we learned from the 1920s and what's being repeated today, local elections matter. School board elections matter. And for a long time, I think a lot of folks, we tend to focus on the governor and the senators and the presidential race. We have got to get back to that grassroots level of running candidates for school boards, for local city councils that are not part of this white Christian nationalist ideology and that have the best interest of the entire community at stake. And we've got to get out and support those candidates, and we've got to get out and vote and to register voters and to make every effort to try to get people to the polls to support those candidates. And people do have to run, yes. And that's not easy to try to convince someone in today's political climate to run for, a school board position. But that's what it's going to take, is people getting involved at that local level.
On Wednesdays at noon, I sometimes attend the OCAP meeting at the Oklahoma Historical Society. And they are a collection of Dominion theologists. And I'm wondering how Dominionism plays into this KKK movement.
Yeah, Dominionism has been a part of, it's a part of our American narrative. I mean, it comes from the idea, even when we talk about that Christian doctrine of discovery with those papal bulls in 1491, 1492, right? That any land that those explorers come across can be claimed for the Christian nation. And that's what then you take the land and this idea of we are blessed as human beings to control the land. I mean, if you look at the history of America and the history of settler colonialism and the extraction of resources, it's always been about white people trying to control the environment and trying to control the land. And that now has become part of that dominion theology that we are in control. And that's because God has what? Blessed us, right? Again, that embedded history that God's providence has shown upon America, the land of the free and the brave. And that's part of that narrative then. Well, if God has blessed us, then we are in charge and we can take whatever from the land.
We'll have this and one more question.
Dr. Barnett, you've taught a lot. I'm working on a book. Well, it's finished, but it's going to be published pretty soon, next few weeks. Amazon Press. And I cover a lot of these subjects, but I have a chapter in there on woke and other terms that need to be defined. And I have several definitions of woke, so that's in the book too. Anyway, in my almost 90 years, I've learned to just be more active. And when I served I established a church in Massachusetts, not far from Smith College campus. We had a lot of black girls in our congregation. It was a women's college. And the day Martin Luther King, the weekend he was assassinated, I'd been invited with a group of ministers to go, and I didn't. But our black girls were pretty upset. So we sang, "We Shall Overcome." And even though I'm against too much in politics in church, I allowed them to sing over and over and over as tears running down their cheeks. We shall overcome. So in those places, I've been active. Now, the other thing is this, getting active today. I met a Langette. She came to my house a few weeks ago. Her name is Shantae. She's run for state representative. And I've been to her meetings, and I will vote for her. Her name is Shantae for the state. I live in a mixed neighborhood, which I chose. And I believe that there are places we can do God's work quietly, even without the congregation.
Anyone else?
Bravo.
All right. Oh, this is supposed to be a joyful occasion.
Joyful in the fact, Don, that last night, so many people here today on a Saturday morning, so many people who are truly interested in learning and then figuring out ways how we can go forth and be better and do better and counter some of this ideology again that's become part of our embedded history as a nation. And we've got to start breaking those cycles of history.
Well, it bothers me that you would not be allowed to make that talk at a public high school.
I know. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Sam Perry went to the meeting at the library in Norman where Ryan Walters spoke and said the race massacre didn't have anything to do with race.
Yeah.
And Sam is very, very active on Twitter with lots of followers. I would encourage you to follow Sam Perry. He goes after Ryan Walters every day. Well, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a 20-minute break. There's mostly breakfast items in the back with coffee. Visit